Back in the ancient year of 2016, I reviewed King Arthur, the role-playing wargame, a fairly ambitious title. It took elements from Total War, RPGs, and even adventure games and rolled it into one interesting concoction. Overall, I gave it a slight recommendation as the concept was pretty awesome, but unfortunately wasn't fully realized. I ultimately was not going to talk about the sequel due to the low reception this received, but after running a poll, this did surprisingly well in it. So, it is my duty now to honor my loyal fans and give you what you want. This is King Arthur 2, the role-playing wargame. So I started with the prologue campaign thinking that was what came with the base game, but that was actually the expansion pack that focuses on Septimus Sulla and the Romans who inhabited Britannia. Overall, it's a short campaign that isn't really required to understand the events of the main campaign, although Roman fantasy is definitely something that needs to be explored more often. I'll be using footage from both the main and prologue campaigns throughout the review, since many of the mechanics are shared. Both campaigns start out with an intro cutscene, and eventually you'll get the chance to answer some questions. The answer in the prologue didn't make too much of a difference, but the answers for the main campaign are far more significant. For the main game, you play as William Pendragon, the son of King Arthur, who is currently unwell at the moment. The questions here will determine your starting skills as well as some starting units. Graphically, this game definitely looks better than the first, but not by much. Even with just a slight improvement, the game is far less optimized than its predecessor. Load times are far worse than in the first, as well as frame rate issues. At least the artwork on these loading screens look incredibly badass. The game is going for a much darker tone, and the artwork definitely showcases that. The battle system has also seen its share of changes. For one, battles tend to move much faster compared to the first. Units now correctly surround units when engaging, and rear charges are more effective. Archers are no longer overpowered, as heavier units have passive bonuses to defend against ranged damage. Cavalry also provides more noticeable knockback when colliding into units. These are all positive changes that make the battles feel much more polished and natural. What was ultimately hampered, however, was the magic system. The problem is now there is a magic shield to deal with it. Depending on the level of penetration of the spell, this shield will need to be weakened in order for the spell to work. If not, the shield will absorb the spell and you will need to cast it again. I see where the developers were going conceptually, but execution wise is just sloppy and hampers one of the most enjoyable systems from the first. Also, not sure who thought this was a good idea, but why was the morale system completely removed? Every fight now goes down to the last man, which can get tedious when fighting certain kinds of units. There's a reason why Total War, even in their Warhammer series, has morale. Another thing that feels cumbersome is the unit placement. Before battle, you place and line up your units. It sounds simple, but it's very hard to line up your units given the controls used. With the elements borrowed from Total War here, I'm surprised the control scheme from that game was not. Victory points are still a thing, providing you with various spells and benefits. For every battle, the AI will just blitz to these locations, which I find dumb because all it serves is to split up their army and get picked off by my units. As you dive in deeper, you'll notice the new flying units introduced in this game. While this definitely adds a new enemy type to deal with, these things can be borderline frustrating to beat without the correct units or magic. Since most of my armies were comprised of heavy infantry, I had to rely on spells and make sure that the shield was weak enough for them to penetrate. To be fair, one lightning strike usually did the trick. Alright, let's now move into the second part of the game, which is the Overworld. It's very similar to the first as you move your armies across the map to capture territory and complete various quests. Thankfully, the adventure quests have also made a return, being just as good as ever, along with some new diplomatic quests. The biggest difference here is that the fact that these quests now have voice acting. While this is a nice touch, I wish there was more than like 3 guys voicing these. The idea of conquering and maintaining territory is still here, but it's actually much less important to worry about defense, as the AI rarely attacks you and you mostly just have one army to maintain. In addition, it only takes 1 turn max to recover and add troops, as well as the food mechanic being removed completely. Because of this, the game relies more on its RPG roots than its strategy elements. And speaking of RPG elements, many of them return, including leveling up your heroes and your troops during winter. Artifacts are now identified by rarity, making it easier to tell what items are more valuable than others. I had someone comment telling me that the provincial management was streamlined here compared to the first, but at this rate it might not even be called that. The system of the past game is almost gone entirely. Buildings are predetermined and a majority of them only benefit the liege lord of that town. And yeah, you can still assign fiefs to different lords and have them get married, but it really isn't as important since loyalty is no longer a thing. And speaking of streamlining, you are no longer able to research any military advancements. Instead, this happens automatically when you accumulate enough military points. Basically, you gain these points from completing certain quests. In a way, you'll never be behind in terms of what you'll end up facing. However, this takes away so much player control and important decision making that was in the first game. The alignment system is back again, but really doesn't apply much to the prologue campaign. Thankfully, the Christian options are far expanded with much better units compared to the first game. In addition, these units can actually compete with the Sealy warriors of the old faith. Diplomacy is also back and also receives some streamlining. Diplomatic options become available as you play along with some factions you encounter, providing unique diplomatic quests. I really like this approach as the factions felt more fleshed out in terms of each having their own unique structure. One of the biggest issues with the first game was the insane difficulty spikes throughout the main campaign, especially on normal difficulty. Thankfully, this doesn't happen as much. However, the game gets incredibly easy on normal even during the last epic battle. As you continue to play, you'll eventually realize just how linear the gameplay is. While linearity in itself is not a bad thing, the game must be good enough throughout to keep the player engaged. Unfortunately, King Arthur fails in this regard due to the overall repetitive nature of it all. With how stripped down many of the mechanics are from the first, there's a lot less to explore here. Now don't get me wrong, King Arthur 1 has its share of issues, mainly due to the over-reliance on archers as well as the randomness of quests at times. However, that game above all else has one thing going for it which is severely lacking here, and that is replay value. The Saxons and Druids DLC from the first game offered a sandbox experience and a ton of replay value. Unfortunately, neither the prologue nor the main campaign offer anything like this. Sure, you can go off the beaten path and take over territory if the game lets you, but the reward is not worth it a majority of the time. I'm also a bit disappointed with the scenario mode. I didn't discuss this in the first game, but basically it works as a custom battle. In the first game, you were able to choose 5 factions: Rightful, Tyrant, Christian, Sealy, and Unsealy. You also had a wide variety of units to choose from. Here, you only get a handful of the monsters and units you'll encounter out on the field, which is a wasted opportunity considering the added variety here. Overall, I would say to ultimately pass on this one. It's a shame how safe Neocore played at this time compared to the first. Outside of some new units and various minor improvements, not much new was done here. In fact, many of the mechanics from the first game were left out entirely, making for a more linear and unremarkable experience. I actually started playing the first one again shortly after playing this, and so it just goes to show which one has more replay value. As always, thank you guys for watching. Hope everyone is staying safe during these chaotic times. And this is Pow3rh0use, signing off.